New on CuriosityStream. How do you connect a 16th century potato to limitless energy production? Could Napoleon's toothpick have a direct link to a machine that predicts the future? And how can a 1700s conch shell chart a course to humans connecting their brains to the internet? James Burke's visionary series Connections returns for a new generation. Experience all new Connections. With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at curiositystream.com.
Bullet Bourbon Barbecue. It's new at Buffalo Wild Wings. A rich and smoky barbecue sauce infused with Bullet Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. Bullet Bourbon Barbecue Sauce. It's now available for limited time only and only at Buffalo Wild Wings.
Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, happy Wednesday. What a day in the George Wagner trial. I'm going to tell you guys, just when you think it can't get any worse and you can't hear anything that shocks you, another day happens and Jake Wagner's on the stand. And on cross-exam, just that happens, not once, but a few times. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Real quick, big thank you to JoJo for your donation. I appreciate you. Music fact of the day, real quick one. We got a lot to cover. On Neil Young's song, Old Man, I had no clue of this, but I'm going to listen when I get done to see if I hear it. The backup vocals were sung by Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor. Great song. Love Neil Young. Saw him in Carnegie Hall. Brilliant. Voice still sounds the same, like you put on a record. All right, day 31, day 3 of Jake Wagner being on the stand, and court started early for this hearing about the ruling that came down in the middle of Jake Wagner's testimony yesterday, where the Court of Appeals said you have to show witnesses on camera. And so they had their hearing. Jake's attorneys were present. And so the ruling essentially came down to this. Jake got to opt out. And his lawyer's argument is essentially snitches get stitches. But here's the thing. I think they all forgot that when he pled guilty to all these charges, the murdering of 8 human beings, it was live streamed for the world to hear. And during that hearing, Angela Canepa said he was going to be a snitch. So find me somebody in Ohio, the biggest criminal case in the history of the state of Ohio, who doesn't know who Jake Wagner is. And not only that, but doing what I do, I'm telling you what happened today. So, so then later this morning, the Court of Appeals backtracks and essentially says that the previous order stays in place, where initially the judge had, after, I believe, the first day, made the ruling that nothing could be shown that was an exhibit that showed any kind of blood or anything like that. And that is still in place, but they ultimately said that people can choose to opt out, and there doesn't need to be a hearing held if somebody opts out. So there you go. Kathy Russin put out a great tweet. If you don't follow her, it's at Kathy Russin on Twitter. She's with Law and Crime, and she said, I have a question. Why doesn't prosecutor Angela Canepa fight to have Jake and Angela Wagner testify on camera? Why wouldn't she want the citizens she represents to see and hear the confession from a murderer that killed 8 members of a family in cold blood? I couldn't agree more. And the thing is that, well, we'll get to Angela's closings here in a minute, but real quick, also big thank you to Big E, Chasing Paper 89 on Twitter. He is our eyes and ears in the courtroom. He sits in when people are not broadcast. He's been there all week giving us notes so that I can give it to you guys. So he is responsible for the information that I have today. So big thank you to Big E, and love that dude to death. I also want to know, when did these 4th of July parties come in? Because we heard about them a lot for weeks. Did you go to any of Chris and yours 4th of July parties? I ain't heard nothing else about them. Not one thing. Not sure. They were really a hot topic with a lot of the witnesses, but a lot of things were left open-ended. And get back to direct. All right, so Jake and Billy were mad that Jake said Billy was mad that he had bought silencer parts online, and also that him and George dyed their hair. He said that Sophia apparently lied to him about Beth touching her, although for me, I really feel like that's an Angela thing, just kind of knowing what we know about her. I think any woman in her son's life was a threat. And I totally think at 3 years old, kids definitely can verbalize, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, if they have been touched. Just knowing the situation, I still think that Angela planted that in her. George said he didn't want Beth Ann living in the house anymore and encouraged Jake to kick her out. He told Jake that he thought that he was putting Beth first and not Sophia. They agreed that she could go stay with friends in Nashville, and the plan was for her to get grants and go to med school. And since Jake would drive through Nashville during the week on his trucking job, they would try to work out their relationship during the week while he was on the road. And he said even though he knew Sophia had made up the allegations against Beth, Jake said he was just still suspicious of her. And he finally learned, as we know, that she wanted out for good. Once he moved, he said he got a couple of emails and a call from her, but we know BCI had put Beth Ann up to that one call, and Jake also suspected that BCI had put her up to that. He said he also knew that BCI was talking to his friends and family. And at one point in the truck, when they're on the road, Jake can be heard on one of the wires saying, "I know you're listening, Ryan." Jake said he was always careful not to say anything incriminating while they were on the road because they thought it was bugged as it was. So at this point, the bailiff in the courtroom walks in, says something to the judge. They go in chambers. Eric said it kind of got a little confusing in there. Everybody's wondering what's up. Apparently, somebody called in a fire code violation, and Canepa slings her pin on the table, according to people in the room. The judge comes back 10 minutes later. They have a sidebar. Things go on. So Jake said he knew they had talked to his uncle, Chris Newcomb, Angela's half-brother, and his partner, Randa, as well as his grandmother, Rita. He said he told the three of them they were not obligated to talk to BCI, and he knew Rita was going to say she had forged those custody documents, but he said he didn't know anything about her notarizing the documents, but only that she was going to sign them. He didn't remember any conversation about Rita notarizing the documents, and it wasn't until Angela told him. He doesn't even remember, according to him, what the documents said, which is that he would get custody and then Angela would get custody if something happened on the night of those murders. He said he knew somebody paid initially for Rita's attorney, and he thinks it was his mom. And he doesn't know who paid for her attorneys, after a certain point. We know she testified that she ended up and had to sell the land that she was planning to build on in order to retain an attorney to fight the charges against her. So he knew that Angela and Rita both had to go give handwriting samples as well as fingerprint and handprint samples while they were there with BCI. Jake remembers George telling him in the semi about he remembers telling George in the semi about that gun list, the wish list on his phone. I think we did hear that list wasn't updated since 2015. And he said at one point, BCI sent him a photo of the 1911. I'm thinking it's the one of him holding the gun. And also a Maglite homemade suppressor while he and George were on the road working. So Jake called R&L saying they could not complete the delivery because they had a family emergency. Jake said he knew they had not found the gun, and he thought BCI had actually slipped up in sending him this picture because they had not gone through his lawyer to do so. At one point, Billy, Angela, George, Rita, and Jake were at the Flying W Farms, which, by the way, Jake thought that place was bugged as well. And he said there was a lot of talk back and forth about whether or not that was his hand holding the 1911. He doesn't remember Beth seeing that photo with the gun in his hand, but if you remember, Beth said when they were at Flying W, they showed her the picture and said, "What does this look like?" And she said, "It looks like Jake's hand holding a gun." And they're like, "No, you can't say that." He did also tell Beth that the house could be bugged. Regarding the threats to law enforcement that George made, he said he heard a lot of venting and frustration about DeWine and law enforcement in general, but nothing that would constitute an actual threat. He said the venting or frustration was physical in nature of what he would do to law enforcement, but he said he would have to calm George down and tell him not to say that stuff, especially on the road, since they thought the truck was bugged. Jake said from an early age, he was taught to comply with law enforcement, to be observant, always act like you belong wherever you were as a kid growing up. This also was something that he was told while they're going around doing their theft in the area when they lived in Ohio. And he said he was also taught, if you're going to hide something, hide it in plain sight. He said he doesn't remember George ever telling him that his honesty always got them in trouble. I do remember it being said at one point, maybe in a hearing, where George said Jake was always getting them in trouble over some girl. But that was never said. It just kind of popped in my head. Billy made a comment after Gary's funeral about Kenneth's dog Brownie being inside Kenneth's trailer the night he went in and murdered him, but he said the dog didn't move an inch. Jake said Billy had 2 dogs, and one of those dogs came from Chris Sr.'s dog, Chance, and we've heard about Chance. And at one point, Billy was frustrated with Jake about the murders because in his mind, they had to do all this for Jake. And he asked Jake if he regretted killing everybody, and Jake said no, but Jake said he only said that to make Billy feel better. He said what he really felt was it could have gone a different way. But he didn't say that to Billy because he was worried Billy would think none of this was worth it and might harm himself. He said he knew Billy was a pillhead, but he doesn't know where he got them. We heard he got them from his mama. He did say the whole family was on those weight loss pills, which a lot of you guys reached out when I wondered why. And apparently it can be used to help you stay awake. They can be abused in that manner. He said he had heard George used marijuana but never saw him do it, and he didn't think any of the family members were on any kind of psychiatric medication during that time. He said Billy had tried to grow marijuana years before Vine and Sophia were born, and Chris Sr. actually came over to help teach him how to do it, but he said it never was successful. And he also knew that Angela was sexually assaulted while in the Air Force, and he also knew she did not report that. Jake said when he found out that his grandmother, Rita, was cooperating with the investigation, his lawyer told him, and he knew she had been charged with forgery. He said that hearing she was cooperating was an answer from God when she said lying wasn't the Christian thing to do. He said he had been praying for a sign or something like that. And he said lying to his lawyers started to weigh on him. So he told his lawyers the truth back in December of 2020 or January 2021. But he said at that time he wasn't going to snitch on his family and he would take it to trial. But ultimately, he told them everything that happened, including who shot who. He said the whole family was involved, and he had a conversation about a plea deal with the state in March or April of last year. He wanted some conditions for his plea deal. He wanted to see his mom, dad, and brother one last time before going to prison for the rest of his life, if that's permitted. We don't know if that happened. I had heard, and I usually don't do rumor speculation, but I had heard that one thing he asked for was to have a FaceTime with Sophia, although I'm sure that probably didn't happen if that was true. When asked why he took responsibility for all 8, even though he only killed 5, he said, I just took it all. He just took all the responsibility. So Angela has the whole ending where she's reading all of his charges and he acknowledges he pled guilty to this, and they're talking about all these years. In other words, you're never going to be a free man. When you come out of prison, you will do so to be buried because you'll be dead. So here's where the fireworks come in. Cross-exam. Jake said so Parker comes out apparently and asks Jake about if he has any physical conditions. Jake says he's hard of hearing, and then Parker asks if he's on any kinds of medication. He says he's on 2 different medications for allergies, thyroid medicine. He's on depression or antidepressants and anxiety medications and your multivitamin. And I think he said, I think Eric said he tried to explain the antidepressant and anxiety was mainly for like insomnia or something. Parker says, you realize you got the best plea bargain in the history of the state of Ohio. Eric said objections were flying all over that courtroom. Angela Canepa said, Jesus, that's false. And Eric said at one point, even Judge Deering was laughing. So I think Parker was reading from the proffer where Jake said none of us wanted to do it, but we felt we had to. And Jake said, yes, that's what he said. So Parker says to Jake, you're not facing the death penalty, but your brother is. And he didn't fire a shot, did he? And Jake said, no, he didn't. And now it's time for a word from our paid sponsor of the week, GladSkin. October is National Eczema Awareness Month. According to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America, while it's usually thought of as a childhood disease, around 16.5 million adults in the U.S. have eczema. And while it affects people in various ways, 51.3% of adults with atopic dermatitis say it limits their lifestyle. 39% say it causes them to avoid social interactions because of their appearance, and 43% say it affects their activities. Luckily, as you know, GladSkin is here to help. But what actually causes the itchiness, redness, inflammation, and discomfort in the skin is a disruption of the bacterial environment, also called the skin microbiome. GladSkin specifically works to target the imbalance in your skin's microbiome. But unlike other skin brands and prescription medications, GladSkin uses MicroBalance, a revolutionary protein that restores the balance of the good and bad bacteria that live on your skin so it can finally heal. It's so effective that 91% of users, adults and children, who tried their top-selling eczema cream reported significant improvement after just 7 days. GladSkin with MicroBalance is steroid-free, works without harsh ingredients, and is clinically proven to reduce eczema symptoms. It's even gentle enough for babies. So, if you've been frustrated with your treatment options, don't wait to try GladSkin. They're offering my listeners 15% off plus free shipping on your first order at gladskin.com/whattheworld. That's gladskin.com/whattheworld for 15% off plus free shipping. gladskin.com/whattheworld. So they talk about his plea bargain, and Parker says, you pled guilty to killing the mother of your child. You snuck in her bedroom and shot her in the back of the head. And Jake says, no. Parker's like, huh? Get this, y'all. Jake said, I walked in and shot her in the forehead. Then Parker says, you shot Dana in the head. And he said, I remember the neck first and then the head. Parker says, then you go in little Chris's room and you shoot him in the back of the head. And Jake says, no, I shot him on the side of the head. Y'all. Apparently zero emotion, kind of matter of fact, condescending sort of way. Like, I was there, you wasn't. Let me tell you how it really happened. I just can't, y'all. No soul to this guy at all. Parker says, Frankie's asleep next to his girlfriend. You shot him in the head. You shot Hannah Hazel in the eye. And Jake said, I don't remember shooting her in the eye. He said, then he kind of backtracks. You go to Chris Sr.'s. You lay on the ground. You shoot him in the doorway. And you intended to kill him. And you considered him your second father. And that's how you treat your second father? And apparently Jake kind of smiles. And Parker says, you consider Dana a mom. And Jake said, somewhat. He was asked about Gary, and he said he didn't know because he didn't shoot Gary. Jake told Billy it was too late to back out when Billy was freaking out. He asked Jake how many shots he heard in Chris Sr.'s house, and he says 2. Parker says, well, you know, Gary and Chris were shot multiple times in the head, and Jake said he was informed there were more gunshot wounds than the actual shots he heard. Parker asked Jake if it's a coincidence Kenneth and Hannah Hazel were both shot in the eye, and Jake says, yeah, it was a coincidence. Jake said Angela and George tried to talk him out of committing the murders, and Parker says George didn't like the idea at all, but he was thinking Billy was trying to set you up. And so Parker says George went to protect you from Billy and never intended to shoot anyone, and Jake says yes, which I think is interesting because in the opening, Parker says that George was never even there and he didn't know about the murders till they got that phone call in the car. A lot of things are different from openings to where we are now, guys, even down to things that Canepa said and what Jake's version is. Sometimes it's 2 different things. Parker says, I think Eric said you were a good Christian, Jake said he thought he was. He said ultimately Jake Jake said Hannah Mae wasn't taking precautions to protect Sophia, and he had no other option. And Parker asked, hey, could you have gotten full custody? Jake says, maybe I could have. Parker said, you could have gone to Chris Sr. With your concerns. And he said he could have. And Parker says, maybe talk to Dana. So then they move into Jake's initial plan, which was to strangle Hannah Mae and then to kill Corey and make it look as if it was a murder and then he harmed himself. So he also says, you thought about taking Sophia and going to Mexico and never coming back. And you talked to a lawyer, but did you explain to him your concerns about Sophia's well-being? He said he went with the better option. Cold as ice, y'all. Angela, according to Jake, is an angel. He said that on the stand today. So 4 years later, little mama's boy still thinks mama's an angel. Parker asks if Angela helped carry it out. And Jake kind of hesitated on that, but Parker said, well, she bought your shoes at your request. Jake says, yes, that kind of thing. He did admit Angela lied to cover for him and to protect him. And Parker also talks about Angela monitoring Tabby's DMs and wanting to protect Vine. And then Parker says, you and your mom knew that Tabby had a bad childhood and there was a worry Vine might be exposed to that. And Jake said something to the effect of, it wasn't if, it was more they were expecting it, because at the time, Tabby's mom was still living with the man that I believe that had molested her as a kid. Jake said he did know all along that Kylie was not his baby, by the way. Parker said a week after Hannah Mae dies or is murdered, you went to get custody of Sophia. And Jake said he actually called the day after the murders to inform his attorney that Hannah Mae had been murdered. So we get to the night of the murders. They leave Peterson Road around 9 p.m. Now get this. Parker said Parker says you laid in the back of the truck for 20 minutes or longer to get to Union Hill, and you didn't stop on the way. And Jake says, we did stop. And so Eric said everybody in the courtroom kind of sat up. And he said that Billy stopped the truck and told Jake, if you want to back out, now is the time to do it. He pulled off in a little area, like a pull-off area. Jake said he didn't want to back out. Let's do this. And Jake said the total time he was in the truck from when they left Peterson to when he got out at Chris Sr.'s to get under the truck to shoot him was about an hour. Once he got out, Jake said he rolled from one truck to another truck before he shot Chris Sr. He was under a silver truck that was in the driveway, and he was in the rear tire area. And he says that he shot Chris while he was standing in his door. After he shot Chris Sr., he gave the SKS back to George and immediately started picking up the casings. And that's around the time Billy comes out freaking out. Parker said, your dad was inside when you fired the SKS, and you could have hit him. Apparently, Jake starts kind of laughing. And Parker's like, why are you smiling? And Jake said he smiles in the worst situations. And, he said between firing the SKS and going inside Chris Sr.'s house was about a minute or two. And he asked Jake, when did you hear the shots in the house after you took the shot at Chris Sr.? And he said it was pretty much immediately after he stopped shooting. He said it took a minute or two to calm Billy down. Jake said he was hysterical. He looked shocked. He was walking down the driveway. Jake grabbed his wrist, told him to calm down. Too late to panic. Jake said he himself was not calm, cool, and collected. He said he was resolved. Jake said Gary was shot and killed in the recliner, which that's kind of new. I always thought he was killed in the bedroom. When asked who shot him, he said Dad, because he could only see Chris when he fired. When he went in, Gary was already dead in the chair, and Chris was on the floor dead as well. Parker asked when he went in, is that when he drugged the bodies? And Jake said he did not do that. He went into Chris's front pocket to get the grow room keys to grab that hard drive for the surveillance. He said he was there inside that grow room just a few minutes. And at that point, they had been at Chris's house for about an hour. Jake said he had never been in that grow room before, but he found the DVR pretty quickly and put it in the back seat of their truck they bought for the murders. After he left the grow room, he said Billy and George were standing on the edge of the grass by the driveway. And Jake said he doesn't remember blood in the house. He said he has blocked out all the gory events of that night. And Parker says, isn't that convenient? He said he found their bodies in the bedroom. He does remember covering them with the blanket on Chris Sr.'s bed. He retraced his steps and went outside. So he went back over to where Billy and George were standing. They were still in that same spot. And at this point, he said they had been there about an hour and 20 minutes. So that would have put them there at Frankie's the first time around a little bit before 11 is what Parker kind of came up with, and Jake kind of agreed with that. So from there, they walked to Frankie's. It took less than a minute, and again, that was right before 11. Parker points out Jake had stayed there many nights when Dana, Hannah Mae, and little Chris lived there. And he said, yeah, he had. The dogs did bark when they walked up, and he said they were loud. Billy tries to get in the front door. It was locked. Billy goes around back, tries to get in the back door. It's locked. The dogs are still barking, and Billy says, we'll do this one later, according to Jake. He said they were at Frankie's less than 5 minutes, and then they go back to Chris Sr.'s, and as we know, they get his truck. Jake was driving. It was Billy's idea to take it, and we found out this week that was a very last-minute decision. They had not planned to take his truck that night, before the night of the murders. So they go by Dana's house, and he wasn't sure if she was working or not. Her car wasn't there, but he said had she been home, he would have gone in and killed them because that was the plan. So they go to Kenneth's. He was home. And they go back to Chris Sr.'s. He said it took him about 30 minutes to drive back to Chris Sr.'s house from Kenneth's. They got out and went to Frankie's. They walked that same path. He said it took them less than a minute to get there. The house was quiet, but the dogs started barking, and they went in the back. Jake had previously crawled into another window when he was dating Hannah Mae. But he uses his knife, as we know, to... that knife is here on screen. I'll put a link in the description with all the episodes, pictures on the podcast version. But that's his hunting knife. It's actually some kind of a zombie hunting knife, which fits his little obsession with the Norman Reedus and The Walking Dead. So when he tries to open the door, he says the knife breaks, but I don't see in this photo that looks broken. But he notices there's a window wide open. So he goes in that window and lets Billy and George in the back door. At Frankie's, after Jake had shot Frankie and Hannah Hazel, he gave Billy his 911 Walther Colt to hold on to while he picked up shell casings and his cell phone. Jake said he himself shot Frankie once or twice and Hannah Hazel once. Billy proceeded to shoot Frankie 2 more times in the head with Jake's gun. And I tweeted out that whatever was being testified to was disturbing to the people in the courtroom listening. And I'm going to throw this picture up there because it's from the back, and I don't know who this is, and I didn't want to get her face, but you can just see she's got her hand up to her mouth. So we're learning some new gruesome things about these murders during this cross-exam that we did not learn on direct. I think a redirect is going to be a challenge. So Billy... as we know, he shot Frankie twice. We know Hannah Hazel had 6 gunshot wounds, although Jake said once or twice. He said he did not think Billy shot Hannah Hazel at all. So he tried to get the shell casings and the cell phones. He said they were only in Frankie's house for about 3 to 4 minutes total. They went back to Dana's, and it only took them a minute or two to actually get to her house. Once they were there, they see her car is there. We know Dana had worked a double shift at the last minute that day. And Parker says you walk in, and Jake says, well, first I pull in. I mean, just apparently it was said very, very smartly. When he went into Dana's, he said the lights were on. And he said they were still on when he shot Dana and Hannah Mae, which is interesting because the investigator said it was dark in there. How they got in was that apparently the front door was unlocked. And this was maybe, he said, around 12:30 a.m. And he thinks they were in Dana's house the longest, which would be around 10 or 15 minutes, he said. He knew where everybody's bedroom was, and Jake confirms that he set up that crib in Hannah Mae's room for the new baby. So he went straight back towards where Dana and Hannah Mae's rooms are. And he saw that at first Hannah Mae was asleep. And he stood in the hallway area between Hannah Mae and Dana's rooms. Now, this is where it gets really confusing because they don't resolve this today. There's no court tomorrow, by the way, so this won't pick up until Friday. I think Jake probably on the stand most of next week. So he said that her door was locked, so he laid on the floor and looked under her door, and he could see that she was in her bed on her phone. He got up and he said he moved to what he called the pivot spot, and he said he froze. That's when Kylie cries. Then he looked at Hannah Mae and sees her on her elbow like she's going to nurse the baby. Then he says Dana sees him and gasps, so he shoots her from the hallway. The first shot was in the neck. Never said at what point the door got opened. We know Dana didn't stand up and open it. She was shot in her bed. But he said the door was locked. So go figure. Maybe on a redirect, Angela will clear that up. At that point, Hannah Mae had leaned over to face the hallway. She sees Jake and inhales in a shocked way. He said it wasn't a gasp. It was more just inhaling. So he shot Hannah Mae from in the hallway and it hit her in the forehead. He said the lights were on in Hannah Mae's bedroom. After the first shot, she fell back. He went back to Dana's. He said he approached her bed and shot her once or twice in the head. He does not remember covering her with the blanket or the pillow. He says at that point, he goes back to Hannah Mae's room. He could not see an entry wound. He thought he got her hairline or something. So he shoots her again. He was beside the bed when he shot her. And after the second shot, she fell half out of bed. Parker, according to Eric, he says, oh, so you gently place her on the bed so Kylie can nurse. And at this point, Jake's laughing, y'all, on the stand, psychopath, laughing. Jake says it's not funny, but he says it's how I react to stress. That's how psychopaths react to stress. So then he walks into little Chris's room, walks up to the left side of the bed. He said little Chris was lying on his left side. And when asked how many times he shot little Chris, he said a lot. He picked up the shell casings and cell phones from the house and left out of the front door and shut it back. They get back into Chris Sr.'s truck. He is driving after killing 3 people, including the mother of his daughter. They go to Chris Sr.'s house again. George gets the truck that they bought for the murders. They go to Kenneth's and Billy walks in. Jake sees a flash. Billy comes out less than 30 seconds later. That's where it ended today. That was it. So Parker's just getting started, y'all. I'm rooting for Parker. I have to say, for the first time in this whole trial, I'm rooting for the man. Rip him apart, rip him to shreds. But here's the thing. This is all going to be about Jake. George is on trial. Crazy day, y'all. We just learned some things that we had not heard before. And I think it's just chilling I obviously haven't heard him none of us have heard him testify unless you've been in that courtroom, but to hear it described as just matter of fact and absolutely no remorse, no emotion, if anything, the opposite of that, what Jake calls a nervous laugh, it must be very chilling to see that and hear that in person. So no court tomorrow. I'm not sure what I'm going to do, y'all. I may end up and do another Valo Daybell mega episode. So we'll see what happens, but Friday we'll be back to cover that day's testimony. We know we won't hear it, but Big E has our back and we will bring you the best of what's said on Friday. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys have a really good evening. By the way, if you're new, don't forget to hit subscribe. You can follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all that good stuff. So I try to keep everything updated during the day when it's not time to do an episode. So be sure to hit that notification button as well. You'll get notifications. All right. We'll see you Friday for this case, tomorrow for something. All right. Have a good one.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered JumbleCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.